Hi, I'm Ann Goby, Director of Rural Affairs. Welcome to the Rural Development Fund webinar. Next slide, please. Today, we will cover a bit of background on the Community One Stop, how the program works, specifically how the Rural Development Fund fits in, and how we can be helpful to you in the application process. Next slide, please. Community One Stop for Growth provides resources to help our cities and towns bring their economic and development goals to life. Knowing that grant applications can be cumbersome, the One Stop is designed to be a single application portal to streamline the process and provide more personal engagement. Next slide, please. The Rural Development Fund was created in 2021 and available to communities with a population less than 7,000 or less than 500 people per square mile. 181 communities meet those requirements. The fund supports a wide range of projects, including design and construction of physical infrastructure, rehabilitation of existing structures, site preparation, and community planning and zoning projects. Next slide, please. The Rural Development Fund fits in various areas of the one-stop continuum, making it a very pliable program to fit specific rural needs. I am now going to turn it over to Mallory Sullivan. I am thrilled to have her as the program manager and main contact for the Rural Development Fund. Mallory?
Hi, everyone. So now I'm going to share some important project parameters for the Rural Development Fund. First, for project budget, the Rural Development Fund generally makes grants in the range of $50,000 to $500,000, with planning and zoning projects limited to $100,000 and grants in all other categories limited to $500,000. Please note that matching funds are not required, but they do make applications more competitive. For your project timelines, applicants can expect to be notified of grant outcomes in fall 2024, and all awarded projects must be completed by June 30th, 2026. The program allows a wide range of eligible uses, including consultants, architects and engineering firms, and contractors, all depending upon your specific project type. And finally, there are a few key funding restrictions specific to the Rural Development Fund to keep in mind. As Ann noted, the applicant must be a small or rural community based on population or population density. And you can see a full list of rural and small towns to determine whether your community qualifies on our webpage and available as a link in the slideshow version of this presentation. Unlike in some of the other one-stop programs, private entities are not eligible applicants to the Rural Development Fund. And lastly, the Rural Development Fund supports projects in all categories of the development continuum except for community activation and placemaking. You can take a look at the prior slide to review the categories and to see where your project might fit. Like all of the programs within the One Stop, the Rural Development Fund is a competitive program. To be competitive, you'll want to keep in mind several key criteria. For project plan and need, when crafting your narrative, it's best to assume that reviewers are not familiar with your community or your project. So you can use the narrative to walk the reviewer through the challenge that your community has been living with and which your project aims to address. Make your case by telling the story, by describing how you have worked with the residents to identify a solution, and by using the opportunity to add attachments to share the story visually by adding things like maps, site plans, or photos. For leadership and capacity to succeed, projects that are selected for funding will show a strong likelihood of coming to fruition as described in the application. And one way that applicants can indicate capacity is by explaining who will lead the project and how they have the experience to do so. Competitive applications will also share the steps that have already been taken and provide a defined, realistic timeline of the steps that will be conducted as part of the project. For project readiness, those projects that are ready to proceed by fall 2024 will score higher than those that aren't. Additionally, obtaining and providing cost estimates shows that your community as an applicant is prepared and will be beneficial in the review process. And for rural focus areas, we recommend reviewing the 2019 Rural Policy Advisory Commission to determine whether your project aligns with its goals. The project narrative is a good place to spell out how your project supports one or more of these goals. For the full list of scoring and evaluation criteria, you can review Appendix 1 of the Rural Development Fund Program Guidelines. Keep in mind that there will also be several attachments you'll need to submit with your application. This will depend somewhat on the development continuum category your project fits within. There will also be opportunities for every applicant to add additional files that you think may be helpful to support your project. We encourage you to take advantage of this, but also to be selective when adding additional files. Now we have a few examples to showcase some specific attributes of successful applicants from years past. First up, the town of Warren applied for infrastructure funding to implement a street improvement project, which included sewer work, fire hydrant installation, drainage improvement, and more. What made this project successful were that the applicant made a strong case highlighting how the proposed project contributed to Warren's overarching neighborhood revitalization goals, and that the project outcomes would directly support the town's documented economic development strategy. In terms of leadership and ability to execute, Warren showed that they had what it takes to complete a large-scale project by providing examples of successful prior infrastructure grant implementation. They also identified specific community engagement and inclusivity efforts that were part of their plan, and the applicant noted their plan to complete related sidewalk and roadwork in a later phase of the project, showing that they were committed to seeing the full project beyond this phase through. The next example comes from the town of Buckland, which applied for funding to establish a community wood bank to provide fuel assistance to residents with fixed and low incomes, and to establish a tax abatement volunteer program for seniors as part of the project. The application proposed to use trees cleared during public works and public safety projects, which would otherwise be disposed of at a cost to the town. What made it successful? In the project plan and need, the applicant described a unique local need and a local solution. They told a cohesive story that indicated how several challenges in town could be addressed through their project. They also described broad-based support from residents and widespread community engagement through public meetings and other publicity efforts. For project readiness, the applicant shared that a site had been identified, that extensive collaboration with the Department of Conservation and Recreation had taken place, and that the town would provide matching funds. The third successful application we're highlighting today comes from the town of Westport. This is a site preparation application for design and permitting for a sewer system. What made it successful was its narrative, which made a strong case that the existing infrastructure was the primary impediment to commercial and residential development. They also shared several town plans where the project was cited as a priority. For project readiness, the town had recently completed preliminary design for the project, indicating that they were ready to take on this next step. Overall, they did a compelling job of connecting the dots, highlighting how the lack of infrastructure restricted development of the land for high-use needs, and that the infrastructure project was the missing link to acting on those goals. Hopefully, these examples give you an idea of some of the important features of strong applications that may be helpful to review as you're putting your application together. When you are completing your full application, to be considered for the Rural Development Fund, you'll need to select one of the following options in Section 2. This pertains to the development continuum, where you'll need to select from planning and zoning, site preparation, building, and infrastructure to be considered for the fund. You'll then select the project type and project focus that is most appropriate based on your unique project. Again, I recommend reviewing the slide with a full continuum to review where the Rural Development Fund fits. And here we have an overview of the timeline for the FY25 round. We are currently in the guidance phase of the process, including the expression of interest period. The full application submission period opens on May 6th with a final deadline of Wednesday, June 5th. So be sure to mark these dates on your calendar. We'll then begin the review phase and plan to make grant announcements in September. There are plenty of opportunities for guidance throughout the process, and we recommend that any organization planning to apply for funding this round takes advantage of these opportunities. The expression of interest is an excellent opportunity to receive guidance on your project ideas prior to starting a full application. The EOI is open through April 30th and is available directly through the One Stop website. You can also visit the One Stop program website to access all fiscal year 25 webinars, including general One Stop webinars and individual webinars for each program within the One Stop. Finally, this year we're offering virtual office hours. Similarly, there will be general guidance office hours to answer questions about the process and individual webinars for each individual office hours for each of the One Stop grant programs. All of this information and the availability of the webinars and the signups for the office hours is available on the One Stop website. There will also be opportunities to submit questions in advance for the office hours, and we encourage you to do so. So thank you very much for attending this webinar. We look forward to hearing about your projects.